The About section of our site is starting to get a little large. It's pulling in different components, it's pulling in a user service, and it's getting to be its own little section of our site. Let's break this out into its own module now, and we'll give it its own router as well. This really helps when we have larger sections of our site because we can call that section separately, and then when we want to, which we'll talk about in a lesson down the road, we can lazy load that section of our site. Let's go take a look at our About section. We'll create a new About module. We'll import ng module. And this is coming from the Angular core. We'll import the About component from the about.component. Since this section of our site is the only section that uses the user service, the contact, home, not found sections don't use the user service at all, it doesn't make sense to load it in the app module here. We'll load it here, import. Now we can use the ng module decorator to create our module. Right now we don't have any imports, which is other modules that we need to bring into this module, but we will very soon, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Our declarations are the components or directives that we have, and we have the About component and the About user component. The providers is the services, and we'll use the user service. If we go look at the app module, we have the providers and the bootstrap here, but we're not going to bootstrap since the About module isn't the top level module for our application. So no bootstrap, we will do exports class About module. Now this module is self-contained. Now we can go into the app module. We don't need this About and About component here. We don't need the user service here, and we'll move those from the declarations and the providers. Let's take a look at our site, and we're noticing that there is a problem here. Let's take a look at our console. The About component is not part of any ng module. The problem there is that we actually didn't import About module into the main app module, so our application doesn't know how to use it. Let's grab the module up here since this is where all the modules live. We'll do About module from about.module. And then under imports, which is where the modules come in, we'll do About module. And by doing the module, it will bring in all of the children of that module. So that brings in the component and the services that we need. Try that again. We're showing a different error now. And the problem here is that we don't have router link. That's because we never actually created a router for our About component and our About module yet. So let's do that now. We'll create a new file called about.routing.ts. We'll import the routes and router module from the Angular router. We'll create constant about routes. Let's give it some type safety since we know that's going to keep us safe. And we'll export constant about routing is equal to the router module. Now the difference here is going to be for child since we know this is going to be a child router. And we'll pass in the about routes. Now we need to define some about routes. We'll take those from the app routing. We'll take about and this one as well. Bring that over into about routing. We need those components also. So we'll import them just like we did from the About module. Copy those two and paste them in here. One thing we can do really quickly, since we don't need it anymore, let's change this back to the home route. And we'll change all of that back to component. And also, we don't need these about components in this router anymore, so we'll delete those. The last thing I'm seeing is we need this type safety with module with providers, so we'll copy this import, paste it up here, and bring that in here. The last thing we need to do, we created a new router. We need to import it into our module. So we'll import about routing from the about.routing file. And we'll bring that into imports about routing. Okay, so let's take a look at our app now. We're no longer getting that router link error, so that knows that we have the router instantiated and brought into this specific module. The problem here is that we don't have ng4 of, which is a pretty basic directive that you'd think Angular would have. ng4 of, ngIf. Why doesn't this about component have access to that directive when it did in the other module, when it was in the main app module? Let's go take a look at the app module. The imports is where we're bringing in different parts of our application, and the browser module is what brings in that ng4 or the ngIf directives that we needed there. We're going to need the same exact thing for our about module, but what's recommended, and it's important to note that you only want one browser module across your entire application, and the only module that should bring in the browser module is the top level module. When we're talking about child modules, let's go in there and import the module that's needed. We'll import the common module from Angular common. And this gives us the simple directives like ng4 and ngIf. We'll bring that into the imports. Now let's take a look at our app, and everything should work the exact same way. All right, we have our about section, our about users, and our parameter routing working exactly how it was before. So let's talk a little bit about what common module is and why we didn't just use browser module like we did in the app module. Browser module imports the common module inside of itself so that we get access to those directives. The reason we only want one browser module is because we may in the future want to change how we deliver this application to our users. Right now we're delivering it via the browser, so we'll use the browser module, but in the future maybe we wanted to render it on the server or deliver it as a mobile app. If we wanted to make that change, it would be easy to do it since there's only one place that references browser module here, and then also in our main.ts we would change it under here. So that would be two locations where we would need to change our application to make it work across a different sort of delivery system. If we were to change this to browser module, then we would have to change it in more locations, and that would make our application a little bit more complex. So it's good to remember one browser module in the top level module. All child modules will use common module, which is the ng4, ngIf, and other simple directives like that. Now that we have the about section moved out into its own module, we can do some cool things like child routing, where this should actually be a child since it's just a continuation of the about route. And also, one of my favorite features about the router, we're going to talk about lazy loading so that this module only loads when we actually hit the about page.